Welcome back, everybody, to Farms and Frontlines. I'm Jess, and I'm here, as always, with Max.
Hello, everybody.
So we're sitting down today with a special guest, Peter McFeely, the Global Head of Communications and Strategy for Food and Agriculture at the World Wild Fund for Nature. Here in the U.S., we call that the World Wildlife Fund. But Peter, is it all right if either way we just call it the WWF?
Yeah, that's perfect. WWF.
Okay. And Peter, where are you joining us from today in the world?
I'm based in Singapore. I've been living here for 17 years. I'm originally from Ireland, but Singapore's home now.
So now, when we are recording this, it is the night before elections for the United States. So you are actually in tomorrow. You're in Tuesday, November 5th. We're a little nervous about tomorrow. How does tomorrow look on your side of the world?
So my wife's American, so maybe we're a little nervous as well. But I'm just getting ready for my day, kind of ready to go. See what happens.
All right. Same.
Amen.
We'll see. Yeah. All right. But we appreciate you taking the time out of your day to come and talk to us. And we're here to discuss kind of what your role is, how you're kind of involved in food security or insecurity, and then the WWF's latest initiative, the Great Food Puzzle. Do you mind kind of walking us through?
Yeah, so my role is focused on communications and strategic planning. So looking at how we engage the various different stakeholders across food systems to drive positive change. Food and agriculture is a central part of achieving WWF's overall mission to build a future in which people and nature thrive, live in harmony. From a food perspective, we want to build a food system in which everyone has enough healthy, nutritious food, but in a way that supports nature rather than exploiting it and continuing to create it. We are a global organization, so we have a presence in nearly 100 countries, a network of offices and different colleagues around the world. My role is looking at a global perspective of trying to build those strategic engagement platforms, shape our communications, and look at how we can deliver a coherent global approach across that very vast and very differentiated network. And I think it's the case for anything that WWF touches, whether it's in food systems, forests, oceans, climate change, wildlife, obviously. There's lots of differences place to place. There's lots of different nuances. There's lots of different challenges and different solutions. Personally, I think that's probably most pronounced in food and agriculture. And the fact that there's such vast differences in the way people produce, consume food around the world, the different heritages, the different cultures, the different environmental, physical environments that shape that. And it's really that need to not only build something that's globally coherent, but think about how that gets implemented and how that gets delivered on the ground and in the water all over the world. I've been with WWF for around 7 years now. Prior to that, my background or in consulting private sector companies in communications and marketing, with a big focus around behavior change and looking at how we could tap into trends and tap into understanding decision making to help achieve business goals for different companies. So what I'm really trying to do now is take some of that experience and blend that into the work we do in WWF to think about food systems change takes action at multiple different levels. There's no one group of people that can change a food system or that can change different elements of supply chains. So it's thinking about how do we engage and influence different people along that sort of path from farm to fork or from bait to plate and find the right ways to create the change that we want to see in the world.
I think what you just said is really great, especially based on just how busy you've been recently with the COPs with the UN. And for our listeners who aren't familiar with that, it's the Council of Parties. And that is a UN meeting with just how many countries, Peter?
There are a few different environmental conventions. The climate change is probably the one most people will be familiar with, the climate COP, which has got a lot of visibility in the past few years. But it's effectively all countries within the UN system, so over 190 can sign up to these, and there's some fluctuation in the exact number that signs each convention, but over 800 and close to 200 parties or countries signing up to these.
So you've got plenty of experience on trying to get people to work together towards a common goal here, which can, I imagine, be like wrangling cats at points.
Definitely, but there's obviously not always going to be a consensus, but it's thinking about how to bring people together. That's one of the things I think WWF we see as one of our big values is the ability to convene different partners and help to try to build that consensus across diverging views, because there's no simple solution. If there was, we'd already have figured it out and applied it quite a long time ago. And maybe
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Amen to that. And I guess that's where the great food puzzle kind of comes in. I guess the first step for this is really education, right? And the WWF has done a really great job with this massive project to kind of just show people what food security really looks like in different regions of the world, how to address the issues that need to be addressed in those different areas. Can you tell us a little bit more about the great food puzzle and how this came about and all the work that went into it?
Yeah, of course. I mean, the great food puzzle in itself, what is the puzzle? It's really what I alluded to. It's how do we nourish everyone? Every single person in the world, and in the growing population, how do we ensure everybody has enough healthy, nutritious food within planetary boundaries? Within planetary boundaries means within what our planet can sustainably produce. That is going to be that we can keep doing on an ongoing basis. So without pushing species of wildlife towards extinction, without overexploiting freshwater resources, without continuing to deforest and convert land, forests, grasslands, savannas,
Right.
without climate change and global greenhouse gas emissions. So that is the puzzle itself, and the platform we've built around solving this puzzle. It's really about trying to look at what are the different solutions that could be prioritized to drive the biggest impacts in the shortest time in different countries around the world. There is no one global food system. Sometimes we talk about the food system, but really that's made up of lots of different interconnected smaller food systems around the world. Collectively, right now, these are the food and agriculture is the single biggest threat to nature and climate. We use more land to produce food than to do anything else. We use most of the freshwater withdrawals go towards producing food. Food systems are the biggest driver of biodiversity loss and forest loss, the biggest threat to species extinctions. And the Living Planet report, which WWF has just produced, showed that wildlife species are declining at an average of 73%. Since 1960, and the biggest driver of that is food systems. We know that food systems produce around a third of all greenhouse gases. There are these huge global impacts and global challenges, but there's not one set of homogenous solutions that we can apply everywhere. What we actually really need is localized solutions that are context specific and place based, understanding the fact that there are these smaller foods. I shouldn't even say smaller because some of them are huge, but there are a lot of different, there's a network of food systems around the world, country to country and place to place. Over the last few years, I think we're seeing progress on the awareness and the recognition and the acknowledgement that we need to transform these food systems and the food system. Certainly at the global level, when we think about things like UN COPs, food is now being included in discussions and in agreements on climate and on nature, where it perhaps has either been absent or certainly a lower priority in previous years. We're still behind where we need to be in terms of implementation and actually translating these global commitments and discussions into true action on the ground and in the water. And what we've tried to build is something that can help accelerate the implementation to try to bring it down from a global level into a national and more local level. So what we sort of looked at, and just to outline the tool or the platform that we've created, the research that's been done, despite the fact there are all these differences around the world, place to place is very different, there are still commonalities and there are still shared experiences. We could probably drill down and create very, very unique profiles for every single place. But what we want to try to make sure is that there's still an ability for people to learn from, to benefit from successes that others are already having and their experiences, to replicate where it makes sense. So we have created a food systems typology which groups countries. We're not the first people to do that, and we've built on the work of some other researchers and organizations, but what we've added to it is a slightly different way of thinking about grouping. So it's not just around physical food security or production models, consumption patterns. All those things are part of the food system. We've included them, but we've also included the environmental aspects on top of the socioeconomic factors. So looking at the carbon stores, the biodiversity stores, the sort of ecological hotspots within the countries to build a bigger picture. Because if we're thinking that food systems are the biggest driver of nature loss, are also potentially one of the biggest solutions to halting that loss and reversing and restoring nature and limiting climate change, we need to take into account what that physical environment is alongside the socioeconomic factors of food systems to get a full picture of,
Right.
of what that food system type is. And with those types, once we've created that typology in those groups, we've then been able to explore a set of different solutions and begin to rank and prioritize through conversations with local experts, through research on the ground to understand what has the biggest potential for impact in each different type of place, and therefore begin to look at what can be prioritized in different countries to begin to accelerate that impact, and what are some of the best ways of doing that, just that we move a little bit away from the theoretical and more into like really driving that action that we all need to see.
Right. So it sounds like it was a really small project that probably took about an afternoon, right?
Yeah, they were quite easy. Just threw it together.
Like the the problem set that you're trying to get after is so daunting that it is solving the great food puzzle. There's two sets to that, right? It's the interactive map where anybody that, whether you know a lot or you know nothing, can kind of click on really any country almost and find out more about what is going on, exactly what you were saying, right? What is happening with the environment? Where are they at in terms of level of harm or, implementation, and then socioeconomical. I focus a lot on Latin America. So my thought was, what if those two are really tied? So social, economical, physical, because a lot of economies are based on like exports of agriculture. What are some ways that you're seeing like the great food puzzle get after some of these areas where they are in a risk area, right? They are one of these top poorly ranked countries, as you said. How are you getting after that? Is it with local experts, or how are you addressing like a way to break physical and economical in these certain countries?
I think just one thing, in terms of ranking, we look at solutions that deliver impact, but there's no ranking of countries in terms of their performance, or somebody doing a good job or a bad job. That's very much not what we're trying to
sorry, I meant
figure
in
out.
terms of their food system types.
That's okay. And so when we think about the solutions, it's about what can deliver most impact in each place, and that balance of economic development, livelihoods, growth, and sort of benefits for individuals and people is completely balanced with the environmental need. It's like there's no sustainable food system in which people are impoverished or where people are lacking nutrition. So it's very much about understanding how these two things can work hand in hand. Obviously, there's some things that have happened in the past that have perhaps prioritized one over the other. We've maybe seen economic growth in some instances prioritized over environmental well-being, and we need to rebalance that. But we can't go in the complete other direction where we completely prioritize conservation and environment without also ensuring that people can earn livelihoods and success. So if we look at Latin America, there's different actions. Latin America is quite interesting. This is where the typology, I think, becomes interesting and a little bit more unique. A lot of people will group Latin American countries together and say, that's it's a bit of a regional perspective. But if we look in Latin America, every different food system type is reflected. Whether you're looking at Brazil, Colombia, Ecuador, as being, and it's not always the easiest way to talk about it, but we've just used simple numbers for our types. It's literally types 1 through 6. And that's to avoid any kind of biases, rather than naming this, developing or industrialized
Sure,
or
yeah.
fully developed.
Right. Yeah. Makes sense.
Absolutely, yeah.
Smart.
The type 1 countries tend to be, a lot of industrial food production, large amounts of environment, natural resources, still certain amounts of development around food security and so on. So, there's patterns that we begin to see versus another country like Argentina is a type 5 country where there's enough resources to produce enough food for domestic food security, also a level of industrialization. So there's some like nuances between the countries, but one factor out of maybe the 6 or 7 we use is different enough to look at them as different countries. So, we see different groups emerging within that. And then as a result, the solutions that could be prioritized change a little bit depending on who they are or where they are.
I really
I think-
appreciate that. It's refreshing, that each individual country is looked at as its own thing. It's great.
Right. I think one of the coolest things about the Great Food Puzzle is how you can go in and you don't just give like a suggestion on how to address a problem. You also give kind of a recap on a country where it actually worked.
Those success stories.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, that's was really important for us, I think, again, to like not just talk in theory, but to really show practical examples of how these solutions are being implemented. And it's about being implemented in that context or in that food system type. So if we took one example of supporting smallholders, it's thinking about how our smallholders supported within that same food system type, or if we thought about increasing public awareness and engagement, that's something that can be done everywhere and all over the world. But beginning to think about, okay, well, if you're a type 3 country, what are other type 3 countries doing? Not just what's any country doing, because it's going to be most helpful, we think, if people are seeing in the same context. The reason for having success stories and looking at practical examples is, on one hand, there may be countries or actors within a country who are trying to determine what is the best solution, or trying to understand maybe what could be prioritized. That's one way the Great Food Puzzle tool that can be used, is to look at what solutions should be prioritized. But there's also a lot of instances where people know what should be done. So what we're then trying to help them see is maybe what's the best way, or what are possible ways of implementing that solution. What are successes they can learn from and replicate? It's not always going to be that everybody comes into this blind. It'd be a bit, I think, arrogant of us to suggest that nobody working within food systems knows what to do.
Has any idea what's going on? Sure.
Right.
Or for some people, that's I think that's going to be an element. It's going to be helpful to have this as a resource. But for others, it's thinking about what are some of the things we can do, or some of the ways we can implement these solutions more effectively.
Yeah, I think that's great, just because it can be very difficult depending on how many resources a country has to know, like, okay, I know what I need to do, but how do I start it? Or how do I get people on board to this program, or so on and so forth. So I think that's really cool to point to other success stories where it has worked and how they got there and all that kind of stuff. I think it's a great tool, capable of doing a lot of good.
Thank you. Glad to hear it.
So you've already talked a little bit about it with, folks on the ground, people working in the area, but when you kind of started this initiative, did you have an intended audience in mind, or was it just kind of the wide-ranging folks in food security or people working in that sphere?
Yeah, like on one hand, it's for anyone and everyone who works in food systems. There's an interest who's implementing solutions or designing solutions. Obviously food systems are vast. There's a lot of different actors. On one hand, it's kind of for anyone. But I think really, if we narrow it down and think about it, it's thinking about who are the people who have the influence over what programs and types of solutions are prioritized and implemented in different places around the world. So that's governments and policymakers, and people who might determine policy, but also where public funding goes towards, and people who are sort of designing the programs that get implemented. Businesses and business leaders are also a big part of that. We're seeing more and more private investment in transformation, but also just ultimately how is food produced and what happens through different parts of the supply chain. A lot of that gets decided by businesses. And then the third sort of big group or big element I think about is, I've already mentioned public funding, but ultimately financiers and investors, whether that's in the public, private, or philanthropic side, like the people who are putting money towards these projects, helping them understand perhaps where we might get most impact and moving away from sort of just thinking about novel solutions or individual ideas that people might be excited about, but to really having a very objective perspective on what are the things that are actually going to deliver most impact, even if they're not always the sexiest and the newest and the most exciting. like what are the things that people really need on the ground, what's really going to make a difference to local communities, and how do we fund and deliver and design those sort of what we call, I'm doing inverted commas, but the right solution in the right place, the thing that we know is going to actually work depending on the local context.
Right. And I just have to
That's interesting,
apologize
yeah.
if these are very basic questions. This is a
Oh,
totally like new way for us of thinking about food security on like this global scale and how things work in different areas, which I don't know, it's very exciting for me. So I appreciate your your
no,
answers.
there's nothing that we can't discuss. It's fine.
I think it's
Yeah, just-
interesting because when I'm looking at, the tool itself, I can absolutely see what you had said, like a policymaker or even just somebody that wants to just get smarter using it and finding use in the tool. It's interesting that, the audience also includes investors and businesses and philanthropic, anybody that's kind of helping the cause monetarily. Are you hoping they are walking away, like you said, with the same thing, kind of where they can put their money, how they can help? Because I don't see anything where it's like this agency is working really hard on X solution, because I guess you couldn't really do that because then it would kind of take away from the neutrality of the product. Are you just hoping they walk away smarter so they know what to do with their money?
Yeah, and I think for us as an organization, this would be part of how we engage stakeholders moving forward.
Okay, yeah.
Talk about more in the future what we do with it, but it's not just an information platform. It's like how can we work with our partners to actually think about how these things get designed or what to prioritize. Almost this is like the tool that we refer to, the map at www.greatfoodpuzzle.com. It's underpinned by a very rigorous scientific research report that's also been published that's available for download. So, it's having that body of evidence to talk with different stakeholders about why something should be prioritized, or what, not just what, but why we feel it should be prioritized, and helping to try to steer some of that decision making. If people come to this platform and make their own independent decision, that would also be fantastic, and hopefully that happens. But we also see this as something we can utilize, and that other organizations can utilize. It's a WWF product, but it's something we hope is useful to multiple different organizations and people around the world to plan and to determine the work that they're going to do, and if it can be used as a means of engaging and influencing people, that's part of it. It's not necessarily come to the platform, make a decision, go away and do it. It's probably an ongoing engagement process to drive that prioritization.
Oh yeah,
Sure.
I appreciate that. The report, the general report that's linked to the interactive map, that in and of itself is 51 pages. I loved the report that was on Mexico, like the detail that it went to in Mexico. I thought that was amazing. And so not every single country has that detail of a report, but there's so many things that are linked, these reports that Peter mentioned, and it's incredible. Like the amount of work that went into it is just incredible, and it's extensive.
It really is, and we will link to the interactive map and the studies and everything for everybody when this episode comes out. So be sure to look into that, and have even if you don't want to go in and read a rigorous academic study, the interactive map is a lot of fun. Yeah, and you'll definitely step away learning something.
Peter, I'm curious, did you step away with this learning something? Were you surprised by some of these findings or any like key data that came out of this process?
There's a lot of things came up, right? And that's, I think part of it is that some of the things that come out of it are probably a little intuitive, right? There's certain things you might say, yeah, that makes sense. And there's other things, you probably challenge some assumptions that we have. And there's other things maybe I just never thought about before.
That's
very fair.
Yeah, like there's, so I can summarize a couple of interesting things that came out of it, so people don't have to go and read all of the reports and so on. But if we look at There's three things that came across as being clearly of very high importance and, with potential for high impact everywhere. And, despite the fact we talk about differences, there are three things that I think we could really focus on. One is natural resource management, really ensuring that we are utilizing our natural resources in the right way, that we're preserving ecosystem services, restoring biodiversity alongside farming, increasing the diversity of foods produced by adopting food production practices that are nature positive, optimizing yields, so ensuring that we can produce as much food as needed, but in line with what we can sustainably produce. So it's not just about increasing yield exponentially; it's about ensuring that we optimize it and balance with other ecosystem services. So that natural resource management is key everywhere. Second element is redesigning finance and trade. And that can look at from the side of subsidies, redirecting subsidies. At the minute, there are hundreds of billions of dollars of subsidies which harm nature, agri-food subsidies, and you're redirecting those so that they support positive practices and support farmers and other stakeholders and actually doing things which are going to benefit nature rather than continue to degrade it. For finance to be risk investments, and also to think about actions through supply chains, like implementing different trade agreements that would help prioritize deforestation and conversion of free products. And then a third thing that we saw a lot of consistency in was the unrealized potential of improving education and knowledge on healthy and sustainable consumption. So thinking around the demand side, there's a lot of emphasis and focus around the production side. How do we change the ways food is produced? And it's massively, massively important. But there is also that demand side. And how do we improve education and knowledge on healthy and sustainable consumption? But I think what's important in that is it's not just thinking about increasing awareness. In different parts of the world, there's different levels of awareness. In Western countries, in Europe, in the US, there's a bit of a better understanding, I think, around what a healthy and sustainable diet might look like versus in some parts of the global south, as an example. But it's not just increasing awareness, it's also thinking about how do we change those behaviors, and how do we begin to shift some of the parts of the food environment on the demand side so that people can make the healthier, more sustainable choice, the healthier, more sustainable decision. So those three things came out quite consistently across all different types of food systems. Yeah, there are also some differences, obviously. That's a big part of what we're trying to see is, what's going to work differently in different places. Again, there's a couple of things that I could highlight. In one of the solutions is around adopting high-tech methods, and without trying to get too technical or complicated about this, when I talk now about like where it has a higher potential, that's not to say that adopting high-tech methods won't work in other countries in addition to what I'm going to say, but it's about we saw a bigger potential for impact in type 4 countries. Type 4 countries include places like Mexico, China, Spain, South Africa. It's quite a wide variety from a geographic perspective. They're countries that tend to be highly industrialized in their food production, but there's also, as an example, there's very high levels of water risk in these countries. So high-tech methods could be of big potential there, and perhaps potentially specifically when it comes to helping to manage water risk and preserving access to clean and safe water. So there may be more opportunity for implementing that solution because of a very specific challenge in type 4 countries. In types 2 and 3, which are less industrialized production systems and really dominated by smallholders, perhaps unsurprisingly, there's a much greater potential in supporting smallholders, which is another of the specific solutions we looked at supporting smallholders through different mechanisms. It's going to be a lot more relevant in places like Guatemala, Thailand, the Philippines, India, Kenya, Pakistan, Paraguay, that in perhaps a slightly bigger, more industrialized system like Brazil or Colombia, even though there are a lot of smallholders in that place or in that country, because of the overall type of the food system, it's not going to be necessarily as high an impact.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. And there's a couple others, I can highlight in type 5 countries, and that's kind of like your, if you wanted to think geographically, like sort of your North America, US, Canada, sort of Northern Western Europe, UK, Scandinavia, Germany, plus
Mhm.
Japan as well. These are countries where a big emphasis should really be placed around strengthening existing commitments and implementation. A lot of these countries already have regulations or commitments in place, but it's that the implementation perhaps is a little behind where it needs to be. So it's not about coming out and designing new programs or building new solutions. It's really focusing, as a solution itself, how do we strengthen the implementation of existing commitments, or how do we strengthen some of the content of what's already been put in place. So again, you'll see depending on the different food system type, there's different emphasis on what actually needs to be built and what needs to be done. For some, it's coming a little bit more from the ground up, and from others, there's already good structures in place. And it's thinking more about how do we reinforce and optimize those.
It's just awesome. Like all these things that you're saying is like, wow, that's amazing.
It
All
really
the
is just
things that are found. Yeah.
such a wide scoping
Yeah.
project. I mean, I know you've touched on the countries and even the types of different food systems in the Great Food Puzzle, and you've already been all over the globe, so it's just really impressive. But just a few more questions for you, Peter, and then we'll let you get back to your day. But are there any current or future WWF initiatives that you'd like to shout out in relation to this, or kind of that build off this, or anything like that?
Maybe something that ties into the COP30 that you're headed to soon.
Yeah, I think the next steps for the Great Food Puzzle for this work is for us to really focus on how it gets implemented. How it begins to really translate into work in individual countries, in real places. Not on computer screens or not in boardrooms, but actually in real places, real landscapes and seascapes. So we've already got a group of countries, different offices in our network who are really applying this. We got work that's been done in Pakistan and India, South Africa, Mexico, Madagascar, the Netherlands, different places where we're beginning to bring together the stakeholders to really dig into this and dissect and think about how does it get built into national plans? How do these solutions begin to get again, I don't want to say, sorry, I shouldn't say begin to get prioritized, but how do we begin to really take the findings of this so that we're building some of the most effective solutions? What role does WWF play in that, and how do we support other stakeholders to do it? So
Sure.
looking at how this gets applied on the ground, and then what does optimizing land use as one solution really look like on the ground in South Africa? Going out
Right.
and working with and different landowners and different stakeholders to think about, well, how do we apply that? What is it that we're really going to do in different landscapes? And then even within South Africa, there's going to be differences from place to place, from ecosystem to ecosystem. Again, even within a country, while we've looked at this from a national level as a sort of point of entry, even within countries, there's going to be some differences place to place and in different regions. So really begin to think about how this gets applied on the ground. What is the applied science as opposed to sort of just the bigger picture. And this sort of then ties into some of the work we do at the bigger global agenda setting level, so around the Rio conventions and the COPs that are taking place. So the Convention on Biological Diversity, the UNCBD, that annual conference, sorry, it's not even annual, biennial, every other year.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
That one was
That's
in Azerbaijan, was it?
So the biodiversity COP was in Cali in Colombia, and we're now
Oh, okay.
going into the climate COP. That's in Azerbaijan. And then
Gotcha.
that's followed up by the Convention on Desertification and Drought, which is going to be in Saudi Arabia. So this year, all three of these conferences are taking place in the space of 2 months. They don't always even take place every in the same year. So the climate COP
Wow.
happens every year, but the others are every other year.
Yeah.
Happening in the space of 2 months it's a big opportunity because food systems transformation really cuts across these different agendas.
Right.
And what we're seeing is some of these challenges are being tackled in silos. There's different ways of looking at restoring biodiversity and limiting the impacts of climate change. But really, those two challenges are completely interlinked, as are the challenges of desertification and drought. And we really need to align and integrate those actions to streamline the process. There's a huge amount of work needs to be done by policymakers and different stakeholders to build these different plans for these different issues, and actually trying to integrate them a little bit better will hopefully make that process easier and to help build better solutions that can help you deliver multiple impacts. And we again look at that and see food as being the best and easiest way to actually integrate those actions, and something that we need to really scale up and prioritize within the national plans. At the minute, there are national plans developed by countries for each of those three issues, and we see varying levels of inclusion of food systems. So in national biodiversity plans, for starters, there's only around 2/3 of countries have actually developed a plan, despite the fact there's a commitment to deliver certain targets by 2030.
Right.
And the plans aren't even in place. So
A lot of work to be done, yeah.
climate plans on the other side, they tend to have been developed, but we just see different levels of inclusion of food systems, and there's still a lot of room for growth and development of how countries are considering transforming food systems and seeing the benefits they can deliver for nature, for climate change within these spaces. So, as we think about what are the practical ways to apply this on the ground, it's also thinking about how do we ensure that these actions are included in something like a national climate plan, an NDC to the Paris Agreement, because that's quite important in thinking about then how it's going to get prioritization and funding within the policy sector. And then even once they're in there, how do we really push and accelerate funding? There are huge funding gaps still, not just food, but really across the board for climate action, for food-based nature action, and really ensuring that we can scale up the finance urgently, because that's critical to being able to modify these solutions.
It sounds daunting, but also exciting that the WWF is able to see these silos working, but to be the liaison between these entities that are to bring these, this food systems that thrive with nature to the focus. Obviously, I'm just wow, I'm listening and I have nothing to do with it. So for me, it's easy to be that's it's almost like this great opportunity, presenting itself in these next 2 months. But it just sounds like great work getting after it, and a great way to just link everybody and what they're looking at with food, which is what we love talking about. So,
and I guess that's where the struggle is, right? The sayings, you can lead a horse to water. You can give them this great tool and show them where the opportunities are, but can't really make anybody do anything.
Yeah, I mean that's it's really about, for us, it's ongoing engagement. I think for us to be successful with this work, we can't just build something and push it out and expect it to take root and suddenly change everything. It's really about continuing to repeat, and re-engage, work with people to gradually create the change. It needs to happen faster and at a greater scale than it has done, if we're going to meet any of these targets and the Paris Agreement and the Global Biodiversity Framework, to avoid irreversible damage to the planet, which is going to have huge impacts for all of us.
100%.
Yeah, but it's that sort of side of when we think about, again, when I go back to sort of some of my experience around behavior change, information is only one element of it. Obviously, without the information, there's not a lot you can do, right? People
Very fair.
understand information and data, but that's not what's going to drive change. If you look at climate change or climate science, there's no shortage of information or proof of what's happening from a change perspective, and yet there wouldn't be a debate around climate change if information alone fixed the problem. So what we're really trying to focus on doing is building actionable, usable solutions and resources, and really demonstrating how success is already being achieved, so that we can begin to bring people on that journey and push them closer towards the transformations that need to happen. Information on its own isn't going to achieve that. It's really about trying to build those resources, thinking about how we engage different types of stakeholders, different audiences throughout food systems and value chains, and within different contexts. Right? There's, as I said at the start, both from it's not just the sort of practical transformation perspective where we need local solutions, also from the engagement and communications and transformation prospect, we need to adapt things locally. Think about how something like this tool report actually gets taken to different stakeholders and introduced to different stakeholders in different ways. What content's going to work best for different audiences, what's going to resonate with different people, and how do we help build that desire and ability to create the change. As I say, it's not just putting out a message or creating one global platform. It's really then about turning that into a locally relevant and context specific way of engaging different people.
Well, definitely seems like you got your work cut out for you.
Yeah, it's not a small piece of work. But
Yeah. Is there anything that our listeners, because we have listeners from all over the world, whether they be farmers or consumers, what can our listeners do to get involved in promoting sustainable food systems?
I think if you're thinking at the individual basis, like even we've talked about how daunting some of this is, but I think we also need to remember that we can change it. There is the ability to make this transformation.
I love
It's
that.
not like an impossible task. And when it comes to food, again, I feel quite strongly and passionate about this. Like, this is something that we can have an individual impact on. There are other sectors and other areas where it might feel very distant, and it's very hard to think about what is it that I can do at an individual level that can have an impact. But most people in the world have got the luxury and the benefit of choosing what they eat. There are a lot of people who are food insecure, but most people do have the ability to choose what to eat and have a level of choice in that. So each day we can make choices that can influence this transformation. Choosing healthier, more sustainable foods, supporting farmers and food producers that are using nature positive food production, ensuring no food goes to waste. Around 40% of all food produced don't get eaten.
I know.
Which is
That's
huge
sad.
waste.
It's so sad. Yeah.
Resources, wasting natural resources, human labor, a big driver of greenhouse gas emissions. So that there's things that might seem small, but if we take those individual actions, they can add up and create that change and begin to build some of that demand side. So I think from that individual action perspective, there's stuff we can do. But thinking beyond that as well, I think it's then just building that out. If it's about what businesses we support or what governments and policymakers, if we have farmers, looking at how to shift production practices in a way that's going to be more beneficial for nature, obviously without completely, in a way that's manageable, a way that obviously continues to support livelihoods, but thinking about how do we make these changes. And then that this is all very much a kind of like something that's internally focused about what the individual can directly do. But if we're thinking about promoting this and getting more people on board, continuing to spread the message, spread the information, there's huge amounts of people still don't know some of the challenges. We take the food waste statistic around that 40% goes uneaten. There's people very regularly that I will mention that to, who just had no idea it was such big a problem. So continuing to share that information, and I think then going back to some of the stuff that we've tried to show within the food puzzle itself is like helping show the successes. If you're a farmer and you've applied nature positive practices and seen benefits from it, sharing that success with people, helping others learn and realize that these things are possible and are doable. If it's from an individual consumption pattern, talking to people about the successes you've seen and the benefits you've observed, those stories I think are what really helps change behaviors and helps people feel inspired and motivated to make change. It's for most people, it's the emotional side versus the rational data-driven side that's going to have an impact. So helping to really see, what are the personal and human level benefits and successes have been. So I think just don't underestimate, for any listeners, don't underestimate the power of your own voice and your own actions. Spread the message and let people see the benefits in action, and that's gonna help convince others to follow.
I love that.
amazing. I know, that's
And
great.
I think that's a great place for us to end it here. Peter, thank you again so much for taking your time to come on and talk to us a little bit about this project and everything you got going on and you're working on with WWF. It's
So
we
interesting.
joke.
It is so
We-
interesting.
We joke and we're sarcastic, but it is a great undertaking, and there's a ton of good that can come out of it. And we look forward to just following along and seeing what happens in the future.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me on. I've really enjoyed chatting to you guys. I'm glad that I'm really pleased to hear that you guys find the work interesting, and
Yeah.
Somebody does, I guarantee it.
Yes, two of
good.
us.
Well, it's not for nothing. Thank you for helping to spread the message and share this information with more
Our
people.
pleasure. We're
Absolutely.
stoked to have you here, and it's been really fascinating for us to just hear from you. So we'd really appreciate it.
It's been great talking to you guys.
Again, we just want to say thank you to our special guest, Peter McFeely from WWF.
Yes, huge thank you to Peter McFeely for coming out and talking to us about the WWF's Great Food Puzzle. As I mentioned earlier, I will provide links to the puzzle and the studies and also the Living Planet report Peter mentioned earlier from the WWF that they released earlier this year. Please follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen to your podcasts. Also follow us on our socials. You can find us at Farms and Frontlines on most things. And thank you so much for listening.
All right, we'll talk to you later.